We were lied to about the new Avatar series, and I mean that in every literal sense, but not necessarily in the way that you're thinking. So, when we talk about this new Avatar series and why it is in fact so bad, here's why. I think for many, when we were hoping that Avatar The Last Airbender was going to be coming into a live-action format for the second time, it was going to be a lot more of a triumph. I mean, it looked like it was going to have better graphics, it looked like they were taking their time with it, we had known that the original creators were involved, briefly, with this production, so there was at least some genuine hope around it. And I'll admit, I kept that hope right up until I watched it. And upon watching it, the issues started to become apparent very, very quickly. Now, I will point something out as I'm saying this. I've only watched the first 4 episodes. I don't know if I'm going to watch the last 4 episodes. And before you ask whether that makes me qualified to talk about it or not, I don't think you should have to spend 8 hours of your life deciding whether you like something or not. So let's go over why, within the first half of Season 1, this Avatar failed to do what 3 seasons of an anime did. I think the biggest problem with this series is that the lie comes in the form of the characters. See, now, when people talk about this series, they tend to talk about how it was condensed or the action elements, which, the action in this does look nice. I think they did a good job with the CGI. The problem with it comes from the fact that it's supposed to be the same story, which leads to 2 forms of issues, but let's talk about them individually. The first being the characters. None of these characters are the same. And I mean, none of them are the same. Everybody has been tweaked, whether slightly or massively, to the point that they can't really be identified as the same character. I think that starting from the top down, Aang is not Aang. Aang is a nice kid in this, but he's not playful, he's not creative, he doesn't really seem to have much interest in exploring possibilities, which were all vitally important aspects of Aang. As a matter of fact, a good portion of the first half of first season happens because of Aang's natural curiosity and wanting to have fun. Changing that so that it becomes more plot-centric probably sounded right to somebody's head at the time, but ultimately ruins the effect that the story was going for, in particular for his character. I mean, let's be honest, he doesn't even try and start learning waterbending. That's something that happens almost right away in the show, nor do they seem to have the impulse to want to go to the Northern Water Tribe to have him start learning waterbending, even though they already know he has to start learning all of the elements. Because of that, I think that, that definitely alters his character. It also spiraled through to all of the other characters. I mean, Sokka is trying his best. I think the actor for him, I will say this, I think all of the actors, actresses, and performers did their very best with the material they were given. They were not given good material to work with, but I think they did their best. Sokka is a great case in point for that. He's trying to be the character from the original. The problem is they're not giving him any of Sokka's good lines, any of his good moments, or anything that remotely resembles his character development. Was I looking forward to the idea of having Sokka being a raging misogynist again in the opening of this season? Not terribly, but then again, its entire removal removed all of his build-up for the first half of the season. I mean, I've seen people point out that with Sokka, his key aspects were he needed to get over the chip on his shoulder, his misogyny, and then ultimately develop out into the good, strong leader that he is by the end of the series. Well, let's see. He doesn't seem to have a chip on his shoulder in this version, not compared to the original. He's not misogynistic in this version, and he seems pretty decent at the leadership thing already, so he doesn't really have anything to work towards in this. Meaning that while he's trying to deliver the same lines, it doesn't come off in the same way. Now, the character that got the worst treatment of anyone in this series, and I do mean anyone, is Katara. Katara was absolutely, I don't have a proper allegory for this. It's like they just removed her character almost entirely. Let's start with the fact that despite what the actress is trying to do with it, her character is non-existent. They removed every aspect of Katara's personality, from her motherly instincts, to the moments when she would get mad, to sometimes when she would make not great decisions because she is still a kid like the rest of them. They're all gone. She is just a flat character, and there's nothing that her actress can do to help with that, because there's nothing for her to work with at all. It's basically like working with a blank sheet of paper. And that's unfortunate, because Katara is one of the 3 original characters, and still one of the standouts even by the end of the series when we have the full Avatar gang. That's a big problem. That is a massive problem, and it does spell problems for any of the other characters, because they kind of did the same thing to Suki. While I haven't seen that much of her yet, like I said, I only got halfway through. Azula seems to be kind of on point, but then maybe a little off too, because they cut out like parts where she'd go recruit May and Ty Lee. So this series seems to have, dare I say, a bit of an issue with female character development. And while we can talk about that in other Netflix adaptations, because that's definitely a conversation on its own, it really resonates here, where they took one of the three main principal characters and just removed her personality. That does bring us to a person who kind of was supposed to come off like he had a one-note personality and then grows over the course of the series, Zuko. I think Zuko's fine. I think, once again, credit to all the performers. I think he's doing his best with what they're giving him. It is worth noting that Zuko's whole thing was his honor, not getting back necessarily to being the Fire Prince, but his honor, having it restored, getting recognized by his dad, has almost entirely evaporated in the series, and it is just about him becoming the prince again. We could read into it and say that it's about him seeing his dad again or having his dad recognize him, but that would be giving a lot of credit that I don't particularly feel like they've earned having. So no, I think that this version of Zuko is about as much of a generic version of Zuko as you could get away with, which is more than Katara got, but still not great. Which does lead us to Iroh. I actually really like Iroh. His performance is great. There are writing issues with Iroh, but once again, performance is doing a lot of the heavy lifting here. I feel like you're seeing that versus, so take this. People have strongly disliked in the 4th episode where Iroh's backstory with his son and then his previous, role as a general within the Fire Nation army has been blatantly shoved forward way too early. And it is way too early. To the point then that you couldn't have Iroh's awesome trying to escape scene, which I deeply hated having removed, because you don't have a lot of great characters in a lot of American media for older people to sync with anyway. And Iroh was great because kids could love him and adults could love him. Go like, oh shit, I can still be awesome even in this universe. While I still think Iroh is awesome, he does have the cool scene with the chains in this. They removed so much of his agency because of that, and that's part of the script. I think if you go back an episode and you look at like where they put into port and he and Zuko are trying to gather information, there's a scene where he's talking to him about what you need for the essence of subterfuge, and then he's halfway through the sentence and he says, you need sticky rice, and he just wanders off, and the kid who plays Zuko has this great reaction where he's like looking off, and then he goes after him. I would be willing to bet something that was not in the script, that was an ad-lib, and they kept it, because that felt so organic and natural that I think those two actors pulled it off. But I don't think it was part of the script, and that is the issue. None of these characters are written to be like they should be, which fundamentally alters the entire story and will alter it completely. If I've discussed how they've removed significant parts of personalities from the female characters, what do you think they're going to do when it comes time to adapt Toph, if they ever get that opportunity? I think that's going to cause a major issue, because she cannot be a bland character at all. To be fair, none of these characters should be bland, but her character especially can't be, and I think they do the same thing to her. That really leads us to the second part of problems with this series, and that is its condensement. Now look, by rights, condensement was always something that was going to happen. We knew that, condensing a 20-episode season down into 8 episodes was going to require some threading of the needle. Some things were going to get lost. Some things were going to get merged. It happens. But it doesn't have to suck. This does suck. And it sucks for a very particular reason. And it's most notable in the episode I was just talking about, episode 4, Into the Darkness. This is not really an episode. Well, actually, I guess it's Into the Darkness and it's The Mechanist. This is not really an episode that should exist in the format that they do, because they're merging episodes that don't really have anything to do with each other in a way that doesn't make sense. It's kind of funny that you could argue. I've seen people say, well, you wanted to condense The Mechanist and Jet Down, and they don't need to be separate episodes. You can put those in the same episode. Apparently you can't, because you missed the moral message of both of those episodes. And because you missed the message and lesson of both episodes, there's no reason to have them here. The Mechanist's primary role was trying to defend his people in the Northern Air Temple. That's kind of almost evaporated because Omashu has its own defense force, so that's kind of unnecessary. And Jet's whole thing was really more reflective of comparing him and Sokka, and once again showing Sokka's leadership development and maybe giving Aang and Katara a reason to not inherently trust everybody, or at least use common sense. That's almost evaporated too, because that storyline is so trimmed down it's almost non-existent. That level of condensement is just bad because you didn't need either one. You could have just said the Fire Nation invented their own hot air balloon, which, if you may have noticed, was something else that was cut from the Mechanist episode. Yeah, that's right. Remember, that's supposed to be a whole thing about how the Fire Nation ends up with air superiority towards the end of the series, is gone. So I don't know why that's there now, if that's just gone. And then on the flip side, Jet kind of is supposed to introduce those characters because quite a few of his freedom fighters will end up being allies for the gang later. But we spent such little time with them, I don't think your audience is going to be able to pick them out of a lineup, with the exception of maybe Longshot because of the hat and the bow. That is, to me, a problem. These are supposed to be fully fleshed out characters who will later join the gang as part of, their whole larger crew during their rebellion. And that level of just not caring about character detail and not caring about the impact on the story is just so evident. It's kind of evident, again, into the darkness, because, well, like I said, they cut out so much from Iroh that I have a hard time enjoying it. Some of the people I was watching it with did love how Zuko comes in and save him. And you know what? That scene does look really cool. This whole series looks really cool, but they did do well with that aspect. Unfortunately, the other two aspects that were really the primaries of the episode, i.e. getting through the secret tunnels and then, dealing with King Bumi, were terrible. Because Into the Darkness really took the Cave of Two Lovers, which was an episode that was supposed to be a bit of world building for Avatar, which they did keep, and then a bit of romantic build up for, Katara and Aang. Well, the problem with that is that Aang's not there. They actually used the twin, the sibling. When that happened, I shoved that off and we kept moving. The problem from there was that because you missed that entire part, you've cut out a whole part of Katara's development with Aang and her kind of growing a little bit closer, as well as maybe Sokka learning how to appreciate people with other skills, because, well, I'm not the biggest fan of the hippies. Him getting stuck with them was both hilarious and a bit of him learning how to absorb more of the situation around him. So both of those are really absentee in this. And then, on the flip side, you have King Bumi. They completely screwed up that character. Because and I feel like this has to be said, this entire series feels like it is just bitter in many ways. Bitter about what it's adapting, bitter about certain aspects that they knew they were going to get complaints about, bitter about things that they maybe wanted to include but couldn't, and that really translates to a lot of the characters coming off as jaded sometimes. Bumi especially feels that way, because a character who was he was supposed to be like the absent-minded genius. He looked like an idiot, but he was actually incredibly tactical and ingenious, and it was largely implied his earthbending prowess what was keeping Omashu so secure for so long. That isn't here. As a matter of fact, they almost say that Omashu is out of the war, which is weird. It never was originally. It took the Fire Nation a while to conquer it, but it was never out of the war. And so you deal with that, and then you deal with him kind of trying to get Aang to kill him, or him to kill Aang. And I get what they were going for. They were getting for the bittered war survivor, but the problem is, this is supposed to be a character who's a member of the White Lotus, a philosophy group that is supposed to basically, at the end, take up a role in helping to restore balance to the world. It would be very hard to have pictured this character having any role in trying to set that up. And I know the idea was that Aang was supposed to make the difference on him, but because, like I said, this Aang is very different from the other one, I didn't feel that connection. Plus, I feel like you lost points because so much of the original was the tests were Bumi trying to see if it was actually Avatar, if the Avatar had actually returned. In this, he already knows that it's Aang. It's not about getting Aang to remember who he is. So, like I said, the tests feel stupid. And that just felt like the hallmark for the whole series. And let me know in the comments, is it worth watching the last 4? Does it genuinely improve? Because it feels like if this is the concurrent thing that the whole series was going for, I don't know. That's 4 hours you can't get back. It's rough. It's rough to see something that you love so much kind of turned into this bitter adaptation that removed so much that's important. And remember, it's not that change is a bad thing here. It's just that the things that they chose to change were the important things, the little things. And if a writer and director can't realize that the little things are important, they shouldn't be in charge of something. But what do you think down in the comments below?